traffic to the site. That was the goal. We're driving audience, right? But how do you get one click below? So like, yes, that's great that this was top performing, but if I promoted it more, like, how do I get to that next level? How does that tell me something that is actionable and not just, hey, I marketed that thing more, or maybe it was a little bit more interesting.
Welcome to the Animals Podcast. I'm Ty Magden, the CEO at Animals.
And I'm Tim Metz, the Director of Marketing and Innovation.
This season on the Animals Podcast, we're pulling back the corporate curtain to show you how the largest, most complex B2B SaaS teams actually get content out the door. Hear from content leaders of some of the biggest names in SaaS, sharing the systems they've built, the battles they've fought, and the lessons they've learned along the way. Today, we're joined by Rhonda Hughes. She is an award-winning content marketing leader who's been breaking down the walls of enterprise content operations for nearly 2 decades. Rhonda has led content teams at Spiceworks, along with Audience. She's also led it at Zoom during the boom of the pandemic, Mural as well. She had a brand role that included content. She's been named a top 50 women in content and won an award for the best TikTok campaign while she was leading that team at Zoom. Today, we have an awesome conversation with Rhonda that covers all kinds of different assets or facets of a content operating program at an enterprise. I hope you stay tuned, take notes, and learn a lot. If you're like most B2B content marketers, you want to lead the conversation in your industry. At Animals, we help B2B software companies do exactly that by creating standout, survey-driven, state-of-the-industry type reports that help you grow your brand authority, backlinks, and pipeline. In just 12 weeks, we run a process that helps uncover narratives from a unique data set packaged into a beautifully designed flagship content asset that your whole team is going to be proud of. Book a consult now at animals.co/whitepapers and find out how to set the new benchmark for your industry. Rhonda, thank you so much for joining us today on the Animals Podcast. One thing that we ask all of our guests, this is the most critical question of all, is what content have you been consuming lately? Ideally business, but we'll take whatever you're excited about.
It depends on how you're defining content, right? I've been really into TikTok lately. I mean, I feel like there's so much that I'm admiring that small businesses are doing to like stand out in a way that is so unique. But there's just so many ways that I think small businesses are showing up that are just unexpected and really like thriving in a way that hasn't been in the world of kind of social media a possibility when you're trying to build followers. This platform allows people to have such a more visibility and connect with such a wider audience that, that's where I've been kind of consuming content these days.
Totally. It's a different kind of algorithm, right? I mean, the content that gets seen and engaged with ranks higher and can reach, not infinite, but like a huge audience of people on the platform, which is very cool. Can you also give us your intro for the audience?
Sure, yeah. Hi, I'm Rhonda Hughes. I am a brand storyteller and content marketing leader with 18 years of experience helping brands like Zoom and Mural, SurveyMonkey, Citrix, GoTo, and Spiceworks engage the audiences and grow. Early in my career, I came up and built deep expertise in social media, content strategy, brand storytelling, and have evolved since to kind of lead areas at the intersection of these things.
Awesome. Thank you. What's the role of content at Spiceworks?
For those of you who aren't familiar with Spiceworks, Spiceworks is almost like a Reddit for IT people. It's really known for being, kind of where IT pros go to tackle tech challenges together, especially more of the small business side. And I was tasked with coming in and kind of reviving that heart of both the community and the website. And so, a lot of looking at how do you integrate these different pieces that we had acquired during a period of time. How do they fit together to tell a bigger story and provide more value to your audience?
And you guys use tons of different channels. I mean, there's a lot of video. I know you're using a lot of social. Can you tell us about the mix of content at Spiceworks?
A big focus was in building up the editorial kind of arm. It is it's part of Ziff Davis ecosystem, which includes things like Mashable and PC Mag and now CNET and ZDNet. And so, it really is one of the ways that you monetize is bringing people to your site and marketing to them. So really centralizing more of kind of a helpful resource where you become this kind of one-stop shop for IT pros, where you've got both the community component, more of like the education and, resources related to how you grow your career, and then things like the tools kind of piece that they offer as well.
Yeah, a lot there. And what I'm getting towards is like, how was that content model and strategy different than what you've done at other companies like Mural or Zoom or elsewhere?
I mean, I think a lot of it with anybody that's in content, that you have to start with your audience and you have to understand who they are. What are you doing in relation to them as a brand, whether it's like your product offerings or if you're a publisher, and what are you bringing to them? Starting with understanding your audience and where do they hang out? What kind of distribution channels do you have? So all those things kind of have to go into play with what your content strategy is. Is it that you're focused on social content? Is it that you're focused on more like SEO kind of optimized content? It's probably a mix of a lot of things. And so the content strategy is really going to vary on who your audience is, what your go-to-market motion is, what your brand is, and all those pieces apart. So I know that's like not an easy answer, but it depends.
Yeah. Well, can you get specific and share like, what the elevator strategy was at some of the recent companies that you've been at?
I think, if I start with Spiceworks, as I mentioned before, a lot of it was bringing these things together and redefining who we were to our audience. And so it sat outside of content. Content was a piece of it, but a lot of it was like rebuilding a foundation, to be honest. We did see a pretty significant increase in organic traffic of 20% year over year within 9 months of being there based on some of those optimizations. But really trying to focus on who we are and who we're not. There was a lot of things that we were publishing content around that were legacy, and there hadn't been a central kind of owner to say, we're really going to focus on this IT pro and what's going to help them in their day-to-day. We're not going to be a news, tech news, because so many people are doing that. We're going to instead really shift to be more of a resource that they can come to when they have questions. Mural was a very different story. I know you guys worked closely with Mural.
Sure did.
I built and led the integrated team across content, social media, community, comms, and customer advocacy. It was a newly formed team. So a lot of how did these things work together? You've got your content strategy. We had a really robust SEO content strategy that you guys worked with. Props to Brian Kitch, who was leading that.
Hi, Brian.
Hi, Brian. I was really focused on helping shape that narrative and evolve that content strategy to be even more audience first, thinking about use cases, how are we going to market and how is that changing? At Zoom, again, it was a little bit more on the operational. I joined Zoom about a month or two after the pandemic hit, as daily active users jumped from, I think it was 10 million daily active users to around 300 million daily active users.
Oh my gosh.
It was such an interesting time to be there. It was probably the most heartwarming experience because everyone at that point in time, from life to work to everything in between, education, everything shifted online, which was, a testament to people's ingenuity. And so my team oversaw social media and content at the time. When I started, we had one person in content, one person on social media officially. And we had kind of other teams had jumped in to help. Things like, the events team or the office managers or things like that. But it really was about trying to scale to support that explosion in audiences. Because it wasn't just like we scaled in our target audience IT pros. It was, you're now communicating to all of these audiences in all these different ways. And so it really was trying to find the balance of how do you fix the fires short term and build the systems and the processes and the teams that are going to allow you to scale with this kind of new world. And so really looking at, we defined the content strategy for Zoom, the brand voice, fueling kind of a global multi-product, multi-persona, region-specific marketing throughout their customer journey. But it was a lot of fighting fires in the beginning and trying to just get our arms around that massive growth and expand from there. So we went from something that was pretty haphazard to award-winning, even winning recognition for our social strategy and our B2B campaign on TikTok as the best B2B campaign on TikTok that year. So,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, congrats.
Yeah, I also even wonder, where do you begin in that growth? There's so much growth. What is important at that point to focus on?
It varies day to day, right? I think a lot of it was at the time for content strategy. We had blog and we had case study, and those were really kind of the focus. How do you scale what you're communicating and being mindful of how you shift the voice to not just talk to people that really understand technology, and trying to figure those kind of pieces out, all while laying the foundation to be able to support this like varied business going forward. And so it was one part, hiring really great people and bringing people in to help divide and conquer. And then one part being creative and kind of coming together and saying, okay, who divide and conquer, who's going to do what? It was such a fun time. I got to work with just incredibly talented people that really made such a difference across the world. And there's like, most people in tech, you're kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I do something that impacts people, but there was nothing more fulfilling than hearing the heartwarming stories that every single person had when they were like, oh, you work at Zoom. This is how it helped me. I went to a wedding. I went to, I had all these different experiences, from life and work and everything in between. So.
Really fascinating. And I think, Tim, I want to dig in here too, to the this era of Rhonda's legacy. I'm curious about how you scaled the team so quickly and how you thought about that during that time. Were there like iterations of the team structure? What did it look like? Can you take us inside that?
Yeah. Well, huge credit so I had, really fantastic leaders under each of the functions. So when I first came in, I owned content and social media, and within a few months was asked to also take on customer advocacy, which was a new function. But really thinking about like, what does the business need? Luckily at that point, it wasn't a problem with trying to get resources. It was really just about trying to be thoughtful about what do we need in the short term, but also how do we build growth paths for these individuals and areas of ownership, being mindful of other teams. Like, content doesn't live in a silo, and it can't. Really good content, you have to be thoughtful about where the distribution is as part of the planning. And so, being mindful of how you kind of create things in terms of pods, like, this like trifecta of PMM, integrated marketer, and content strategist that could work together. That area of ownership thing, I think, is one of the pieces that is really critical when you're building a content team. It gives people the ability to test and learn and feel really proud about what they're driving, and kind of shifts the accountability I see for like an individual. And it's not just for content roles. I would say it's any role, really, whether you're early in your career, mid-career, whatever, being really clear about this is your area. Like, what do you think? And you're driving these metrics, and this is your responsibility, allows people to have more fluidity and more creativity with how they tackle problems and how they evolve the area that they own going forward. And so I think that was one of the ways that we were able to scale and kind of get more done, is being, building that trust with the team, giving them escalation paths. If something was getting in their way, I will come and like block and tackle for you and that sort of thing. But, giving people that kind of area of ownership so they could move quickly together.
Yeah, ownership was the word, and accountability that came to mind when you think about, maybe the phrasing isn't right here. We're like KPIing people, right? Like giving them something to run after. Can you help us understand specifically, like, what were the KPIs of individuals in the team? And I'm really curious because from my experience in the enterprise, it's kind of hard to own a number anywhere because there's so many other people, as you mentioned, other stakeholders, PMM, integrated campaigns, demand, whoever else, So if you can get specific there, I think it'd be really helpful to the audience.
Yeah. I mean, I think, again, it depends on the goal of the content and how you're doing it and how you're structuring the team. Because some people are, they're managing everything for a specific audience or a number of audiences. And they, from blogs to case studies to customer stories to research reports, like everything is owned. That's how I like to structure it, because I think you get to know that audience better and you get to be thoughtful about like, how do we test new formats? But there's also ways where you're doing it more by like, what's the goal of that content piece? So SEO content kind of specialty, or case study kind of specialty. And so like there's pros and cons to any of these types of things, but obviously the way that you shape that is going to drive what those metrics and KPIs are. Oftentimes when I join teams, I find that content folks aren't always thoughtful about that because they're disconnected from it. It's more of this like engine of, please give me content to fill my thing. And you never get that closed loop. You never get the like, hey, this was top performing because of X, Y, and Z. And so that's where, again, I kind of do think it's got to be working in that integrated team. Oftentimes with like website traffic, kind of, you as a content leader or content strategist will be in the weeds with that and be able to kind of test and learn. But I think across marketing, you have to really be more integrated on, okay, what are we doing together? And while you might not own it outright, because you're always going to work with other people, there has to be that closed loop. And I think there's always the focus on what are you doing, and not necessarily like, I mean, you think about quarters, right? Like the end of quarter, you're like fast trying to get some sort of like recap report to say what we did, but then you're on to the next so quickly. And so like you kind of have to like build space as a leader to take a breath and encourage people to really reflect on what worked. How did it work? How do we make it better?
It's hard to do, right? When there's so many shiny objects to go chase next, or just, the next quarter's number to hit.
Yeah.
I want to ask about how you measured yourselves and set those KPIs. Who is involved? Did you all build your own dashboarding? Like, I actually think the tactics to that are pretty interesting at the enterprise.
And also, I would add, like, from across these different companies you've been, like where did it work really well, and like maybe the comparison would also be great.
Nobody does analytics as well as they could be. Like everybody's got a broken somewhere that you're like, oh, I'm using this spreadsheet, or this reporting is a little questionable. So let's just use it as like a directional, like, hey, I get the vibe that this is going up and to the right. That's great. But like, I don't really trust the specifics. And so I think it's that like dirty little secret. Like, I mean, I feel like early days that I trusted the data a little bit more in the marketing orgs that I was in. That doesn't mean I don't trust the data, but like I said it and it's recorded, so it's true. But I think
reporting.
Especially you have a strong data team that can be your counterpart, but like the reality of the situation is sometimes it's a bit messy, and you kind of have to try to make the decisions that you can while rebuilding that foundation. So like that was one of the big things that we were doing at Spiceworks, and they continue that work today, is like, there was a lot of legacy kind of issues underneath the hood of the website and of the reporting kind of structure. And so a lot of it was really based on traffic to the site. That was the goal. We're driving audience, right? And so, but how do you get one click below? So like, yes, that's great that this was a top performing, but if I promoted it more, like, how do I get to that next level? How does that tell me something that is actionable and not just, hey, I marketed that thing more, or maybe it was a little bit more interesting. And I think that's where you get the struggle, is that like, we've got a lot of like top line kind of metrics. If I look at more of the social content side, you get metrics around, I like to call it like total social actions. It's like you created this content, and what did it do? And it was somebody stopped swiping or thrumming or whatever it was, and they took some sort of action where it was a like, a swipe, a comment, a share, a view, whatever that piece is. It just indicates that there was something of interest to the content they created. Do more of those things. But I do think that a lot of content teams struggle with more like in-depth kind of metrics that help them to understand really what's resonating with their audience. On the kind of like more demand gen content side, some organizations have it set up a little bit where you can see better. I have been in some places where they're rebuilding this as well. Probably the last couple ones, it's been more of a rebuild. In an ideal world, you're able to see like, oh, it generated this many leads, and then that was this, that directly related to this amount of one opportunity.
Right.
And, how did that ripple effect with the account itself? So like maybe I filled out the lead form, but ultimately this was the purchaser over here. And so like, obviously, that's a marketing ops type of, struggle, challenge and struggle. But yeah, I mean, I think as a content leader, you're always kind of struggling, and marketers as a whole, with what you can actually measure and what does that really say.
Well, and then also, how do you take that forward to iterate on the program, right? Especially if you have, and I'm curious your experience here, if you have stakeholders that are driving the roadmap to some degree, right? And they're saying, we want more white papers, but in your data, you're like, actually, maybe they're not performing as much as some other kind of program.
Yeah.
So maybe you can hit on like the role of the content team in ideation, I guess, and also like determining format and the roadmap. If it differed at different companies, I'd be interested in that, but just generally.
Yeah. I mean, of course it differs in different companies. I like to see content strategists as true strategists. Let's come to the table. Let's have, the different, again, I kind of go back to the like pod model. You've got like somebody who's owning integrated marketing, kind of like the distribution, and whether that's a demand gen partner or, whatever title you give it, product marketing that understands like the market itself and the competitive advantage of like how we're enabling the sales team and those different pieces. And these people come together to say, I'm going to tell you what content is going to work and how should we be putting this together and being thoughtful about how we're sequencing these types of things. Everybody should be bringing that expertise to build the plan together. I have walked into organizations that were more of like a service org of like, let me fill out the form. I want a case study and I want this. But I always go back because I'm always shifting that more to be a strategic partner for the business. It's better for people than their roles. Nobody wants to be told like, hey, create these things in a vacuum, right?
Yeah, like a vending machine, like A6.
Yeah, like one of these and one of these and one of these. And oftentimes that is what you kind of walk into is like, okay, let's level set. Like, and it's usually just me trying to understand, or, one of my content strategists trying to understand, like, who's your audience and what are you trying to do? Okay, great. Let me tell you a little bit on how I would recommend doing that and why. And how can we do that like in a shorter format? You mentioned, case studies. That's an example. Everybody wants a case study for everything all the time. Yeah. And what I find when I talk to sales teams, yes, you need case studies. I think of customer stories on a spectrum, and you can't see my hands going like this all the way, and there's a lot of different kinds of ways that you can tell stories. Case study is like this kind over here, and it has its place. But when you actually talk to the audience, the internal audience asking for those case studies, sales typically, what they really want may be a good quote and a logo, or like a small video, or those sorts of things. And so I do try to do a little bit of discovery around like, what are you actually trying to solve for? What's your goal? And then what are the distribution channels and all those kinds of pieces to then make those recommendations of, here's what we could do. And what I have found oftentimes is people welcome that kind of partnership. The thing they get nervous about is like, I need a thing, and I know this thing, and this is what I'm going to ask for. But if you create that kind of partnership with them, then they usually get really excited about it too. Is like, oh, I have these options. And so it's really in building the trust and kind of like working together as a team.
But that takes so much work, right? It's so much easier to just do the case study than go, sit with them and help them think through the strategy and the larger, it is a better outcome. I agree. But there's definitely pressure to just comply, right? Yeah. It's not easy. It's easier said than done. Tim, what were you going to add?
No, and I'm also curious, like, how do you then in practice support that new process or put that in place? Do you then have like regular meetings with them, or is there still a form, or like, how do you actually make that happen?
Yeah, it varies depending on like how sophisticated, how many audiences you're creating content for. But for like, if I use the Zoom model, because that's an example that helps, we had different content strategists that were supporting different personas or different products, and they'd work together with their kind of core counterparts. I think it does take a lot of laying the groundwork in the beginning. And it's hard because the engine is running. Give me my things now.
And their habits,
And so it's a little bit of, okay, yes, we'll get these things. I also honestly feel like too many people are focused on the new things, and you gotta make sure they're fully leveraging the stuff that you have. And so in a lot of organizations, I've built like internal content libraries so that it's super easy for people to see what they have and what they can use. And so it becomes less about the, hey, I need this thing than churning, and more about like, let's do fewer things, but let's be like smarter about them.
A lot of enterprises, I'm kind of making this up, but like from vibes, a lot of enterprises are service oriented in the way the content team is positioned. Like the model is like the content team is in service of the rest of the organization, and there's a lot less strategic work that is done. It sounds like you believe that's not the ideal setup. I would tend to agree. And so what would your advice be to someone coming into an organization like that aspires to do a more strategic approach? Like, what would be some practical steps they could take in order to help shift the role of content within the organization?
Yeah, that's a really good question. If I thought about it as like a new person coming in, there's probably two pieces. One, like digging into the data to understand like what's working. Because I think people are a lot more willing to change what has happened in the past if you can, show how you can evolve it in a way that's going to be valuable. It's going to do better if we do this. And oftentimes it's like grounding things in that data. Did you know that case studies are your case studies while you're asking for these were only read 20 times in the last so I use that kind of data to make the case. Case study is actually one of the most difficult pieces of content to create because of all of the approvals and everything else that comes in there. It's not a small one.
And they don't always get published. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you shift that instead and do more of a customer learning, like I want to talk about the strategy that you have. And yeah, I want you to like kind of talk about where you can, how you've used our product, solution, whatever. But if you shift it to be more knowledge share, it changes the way you can use it. People are much more likely to find that to be interesting because it's less about like, I love this product because of this. That kind of stuff is really important, but like knowledge share. And so I think going back to your more specific question around like, how do you make those shifts? I think using the data and then also doing a roadshow with all of your stakeholders and just be curious, understand like, what are the things pushing on them? Like, what are the things that they're feeling like, I got to do this thing? Like, how do you partner with them? How do you help them solve what they're trying to solve for? Understand it from their perspective. Like, what's driving their, what are they waking up every day worried about? And how do you take that, whatever is related to content off their plate because they know that you're thinking about that too. And then test and learn. People are way more accepting of pilot programs. Like, that's like a little hack for you.
Yeah.
If you say to someone, hey, I want to pilot this or I want to test this, what it tells you is like, okay, there's a small thing that we're gonna validate, and it's gonna be like an MVP. And then you're gonna have some data, and then you're gonna know, hey, do we stop doing this? Do we evolve it? Or do we not? And so I think that's another way that you can start to make the case for evolving these types of things. As a leader coming in, I think it's also just resetting what expectations are. Like if they've only worked with content teams that were, more of like I need one case study, I need one blog, I need these things, then that's all they really understand. When in doubt, I have found much success with bringing in external speakers. So like if you ever are trying to sell something and people are
bring in Rhonda. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could do that too. Or more just like, I used to get like friendlies of mine. I would be saying something and I'd be trying to get traction. And this was early in my career, obviously, like, social content, all these things have evolved a lot. But you hire somebody to come in or you have a friend come in and kind of talk about their experience as well. And somehow hearing it from someone external, it comes across differently. So,
I like it. You gave us 4 right there, 4 things they can do. 1 was bring data. 2 is do the roadshow, right? So like with your stakeholders, ask, what's keeping them up at night. 3, if you're trying to push new things in, pilot it. 4, the reset conversation and education, especially like bringing in someone extra. And then, I'm going to add a 5th because you had mentioned it and it's what triggered the question, which was like kind of like 1-to-1 judo, right? Like someone fills in the form, they ask for a case study, you kind of like, help them think through the strategy and the ask and then come out the other side with a slightly different, more optimized idea.
Yeah. It's the fun part, I think. Most people welcome having a partner. I've actually not had pushback ever when we approach.
No, it just takes work, right?
It does. From a growth path standpoint, for anybody in their career, whether you're coming in as a leader or like you're an individual contributor, like that's the part that you can grow. And it's the part that's a little bit fun too. Like you get to co-create something, both understanding better internally, but also looking externally. Like I love talking to customers. I love talking to audience members and understanding like, did that land how I thought it was going to land?
I feel when I hear talk, I almost feel like it's also about showing that content is really an expertise and a craft. Because I wonder if there's something going on where like, well, at least until before this year, if people would need something for programming and they go to an engineer, they're like, well, I don't know anything about engineering, so you tell me how to do it. Whereas with content, maybe there are also more people who feel they kind of know what they want and what it is. And it sounds from what you described that it's also about showing what's possible and you knowing like what is best and kind of demonstrating that so that people also get a sense of like, oh, wow, this is, there are other things possible and it's not just something anyone can do, essentially.
Yeah. And 2 other things that just sparks too is like, sometimes it's understanding who people admire. Like what's the brand they admire? Like, is it Salesforce? Is it Google? And then showing their example. And it's like, look at this cool thing they're doing.
That's a hack. I like it. Yeah. Totally. Well, I want to ask about hiring. Okay. Hiring in the enterprise, right? How have you made the case for additional headcount successfully in the past?
I'm trying to think of the last couple of years. It's been a little bit different in the tech world, right? Like less about hiring.
Right. We just saw the Shopify memo from Toby, their CEO, of like, don't ask me to hire unless you've tried to figure this out with AI first. So it is going to change even more.
Yeah.
But yeah, take us back to different eras and maybe how you've made the case successfully.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the times it's understanding, it's looking at the data again and looking at the different areas of the business you want to support. So the two examples I would think, again, kind of going back to Zoom, like if you had another product, because they have a whole suite of products. They're known for meetings, but they got all this stuff underneath the hood. It's kind of looking at, what do you need to support and thinking with your partners too. Because like if you're going to add a new product, if you're going to add a new persona, if you're going to lean into another, region, this is what we need from a marketing standpoint to support. We need one of these kind of thing. Or you can have more of a hybrid role that does multiple, especially when you're looking at like regional. But it's kind of approaching it that way and making sure that your leader understands, like, in order to do this well, we've got to, or it's a trade-off, right? So like, that's always what comes down to. Here's what we're supporting now. You're asking us to add these. We need these resources, or we're going to have to cut some things over here. And here's what I would cut first. And so, I understand it from both sides. As a leader who's having to tell people, no, you can't have a head count, but like, we need these things. It's their job. It's our job to help you prioritize. So I think, it's making the case in that way. There have been times in my life where I've been offered headcount and I'm like, no, I don't want any more. Like at Zoom, we were growing so fast that it was like, I don't want more. I think we need to like take a beat and figure out, the growth paths again. And is this the right structure for us? Because we're changing and growing so fast, and so are other teams. And we didn't always have line of sight. Oh, they're going to hire this person. And oh my goodness, that means this is more of a need for over here.
Right.
And that was just like a very unique growing pain that I don't know that any other organization has ever had. But I mean, there's probably some similarity for those hyper growth kind of companies that are.
I think so. Yeah, totally. There's a whole new initiative we did not account for, right? Or like my favorite is like, you acquired a company and now it's like, hey, Rhonda, like here's a website I need you to migrate into ours, right? It's like, okay, great. Because I had that planned for the year,
Add it to the list. It's like, okay, well, these are my 3 priorities. Like, where does this fit? Which one should it take? And kind of really being clear about what is possible. And, sometimes it does take saying no, and not obviously saying no to your boss, because that's not going to work, but like, it's saying no to something. There's only so much time and there's only so many, applying it to content too, like making the decision. This was a very common one. Many people want to start, internal people want to start their own like podcast or video series on LinkedIn.
Totally.
And I actually had a form and I'm not a huge fan of form, but I had a form in terms of like, okay, just getting people to try to think about the strategy behind things. Like, how are you different? How are you going to produce this thing? Like, how are you going to, like, all the pieces and part that have to come in? Because the reality is like, you've got this amount of time and this amount of resources. Choosing to do this thing means you're not doing these other things. And so like every so often stepping back and saying, this is all the stuff we're doing right now. What could we be doing? What will we cut so that we could do that? And I do think that that's the role of the leader, is to really make sure that like, give people permission to say, we're going to cut these things. We're going to stop doing these things. And I think it's even more critical in the last couple of years where you have, constant kind of evolution of companies, reductions of teams. People are owning so much more than they used to. And it really does, you can't do it all. And you can't do it all well. And so it's really about working with your leadership team and making sure that everybody's clear on, okay, these are the things we're going to prioritize because of these things.
Yeah, it's a little painful. I was going to ask about content's role in brand narrative storytelling, right? How do you see that? Like, does a unique leader like you get the chance to actually have a hand in setting the narrative? Or like, is content more an amplifier of a brand narrative? Like, I see you as a storyteller at these, building teams to do so at larger companies. So I'm just trying to grasp it. Like, how do you see brand narrative and story and content's role within that?
One of the best compliments somebody ever gave me, and I use it like in my bio and stuff, is that I'm a connector of people and ideas. And so I think like naturally I have always looked at whether I was the one owning this piece or I had a part in it. I also kind of looked at who else should be involved in this, not to make something too big and unwieldy, but at the same time, like especially at the kind of ideation, you would be remiss to not have the right people in the room and also have the smartest and most creative minds in the room. And so I think, I don't know if that answered your question, but I kind of like went on a tangent, at least related to the topic.
Yeah, no, it's good. I like it.
I think another way to look at it is like, if there is an existing narrative and story, how do you maintain that at these companies and at that scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's it depends on, I'm going to say that again, it depends on how you're defining narrative. But, if I want to try to like apply this, oftentimes there's like one-liners. I like to try to synthesize, what are you trying to communicate down to like one line point of view kind of things. And so like, or what is the like one struggle that you as a brand are navigating against right now? Like I want people, I mentioned before, Zoom was known as only meetings. Zoom is more than meetings. How do we communicate that? During Zoom's evolution, there were different kind of message points that we were trying to get across based on that evolution. Right during the pandemic, we were just trying to get our arms around like all the really amazing, heartwarming things that customers and users were doing that were never intended with this product, and being a part of that public conversation. And so a lot of it was really just like scale and how do we get our arms around these things and how do we build the right listening points and that sort of stuff, and leverage these like moments that are happening in real time. But as the pandemic was kind of winding down, there was this narrative that Zoom was going to go away. Like, once everything's going back in person. And so if I look at it from like a very specific kind of content strategy standpoint, we worked with an outside agency to do a massive survey to really understand what consumers expected about the future. How virtual did they want it across, I think it was like 10 different countries, 11 different use cases, from like healthcare to government to education to work to like celebrations and everything in between. And it really aligned to like the way our use cases were and our personas and that sort of stuff. And the goal was to get data that helped to validate that our customers could use to understand what their customers or their constituents or what their employees wanted the future to look like, so that they would continue to invest in tools like virtual meetings and that sort of stuff. And so that's all to say that you as a content can evolve what your narrative is. It will create content to support whatever narrative you're trying to push. And so I do think it's a complement. It's one of the ways, when you think about brand strategy or brand narrative, it has to be, there's an action behind that. It can't just sit on a shelf. And so, really thinking about how you connect those things.
I love it.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the award-winning TikTok campaign that you did?
That's like a good segue, actually, because one of the things this all came about. So we actually were late to the game in getting on TikTok. When we joined there, obviously the world was still on Zoom. So a lot of the conversation. So I'm saying this for any social media professional out there that's like, I can never do that. It's like, yeah, we kind of had like all the right things to make it something that was bigger than it was. The idea came about because there was a lot of misinformation going on about Zoom and things like security, or like, hey, that the host can turn off your mute, like those kinds of things that were kind of all going around. And they were going pretty viral on TikTok and on social media. And at the time, we had already started really defining the social content strategy related to how do we connect, how do we educate, and how do we inspire, and kind of really leaning into those sorts of buckets. Around the education piece, how do we communicate that this is misinformation, but do it in a way that's like TikTok oriented? So we really were focused on trying to make something that was fun and interesting and engaging and not super boring. The team there did such a fantastic job, so I have to give them credit. Melissa Francois, Allison Coleman, Allison McCarthy, she just got married, and Julie Brute. They used to do this kind of like newsroom planning where they would work together to come up with these different ideas. And so massive props to them on the award. There was a broader social team involved, but those were three, really the leaders of that team. And so the campaign itself came out of this misinformation and trying to like myth bust it. And address it head on in a really like fun kind of way. And so it was a content series where we combated things about like, I think the top performing one, which had over 8 million views, organic views, was related to a security like misinformation. And when they created it, they picked the most amazing song. And sometimes it's about like finding that. And it runs in my head sometimes. It was like, I don't want to sing but it was like, stop spreading the rumor around. And it was like, I don't know, something super catchy about it. And it just took off. And it was this whole series that was really just in response to the questions people were asking, the features people were asking for, and trying to like be helpful in the moment when everybody was using Zoom.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Really cool.
Yeah.
You'll have to drop some links in the articles that we publish and embed this in. Looking back at your stints, Zoom, Mural, Spiceworks, what's one lesson you wish you learned earlier about enterprise content marketing?
You get to a place where it's kind of just like it's shaped your approach to things so fully that you're like, when did I learn that? When did I shift to be that way? I have always had this approach and this kind of mantra around creating value, not noise. And it's like, and my teams will laugh if they're listening to this right now, because like I've probably said it so much that it should be on a mug or something.
There she goes again.
There she is.
It's on your LinkedIn cover. I saw it. Yeah.
Obviously, what does that mean? Well, you have to know who the audience is, and you got to be able to ground your decisions in this kind of data-driven approach and be mindful of, where this content is going to be and how's it going to show up and what's the sequence and all of those sorts of things. So like you say it and it's short and it's pithy, but like there's a lot underneath the hood there. And I do think that for content folks, for marketing as a whole, like you have to know who your audience is. You have to understand what you're trying to do, and you have to be empathetic to like what they actually want to hear. And so like that human language, that's another one of those like compliments that somebody gave me. One of my bosses once used to send things to me to human it up. And I was like, that's weird. Like I can speak like a human. Wow. Okay. But somehow when you put on your marketing hat, you forget that that's the thing that resonates. And so, at the end of the day, all the B2B and enterprise marketers are trying to do is help somebody solve a problem. They want to help them solve the problem with the product or service. But if you can tell the broader story and help with the connecting and the knowledge share, and to like, it's a product plus all the practical stuff around that.
Totally.
That's the best content that you can create. And
Totally.
the best thing you can do is then surface the people who are doing that really well and help them to knowledge share. And then you can repackage and repurpose and use that in a lot of different ways. So I know that was not actually the answer to your question, but hopefully it was somewhat valuable.
Oh yeah, that's an enormous gold nugget right there. Yeah, that's a great place to end. So Rhonda, thank you so much for participating. Where can people find and connect with you?
Yeah, there is a final question. Yeah.
Oh yeah. LinkedIn is a good one. Like I'm pretty active there, looky-loo active, commenting live. I don't necessarily post as much, but that's a good one to connect with me related to that too.
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Awesome. Well,
thanks,
thank you.
Rhonda.
It's been fun.
Well, Tim, what'd you learn and take away from Rhonda just now?
The first thing is practical. I love their idea of like building a library and focusing more on things you already have. I thought it's just a really, really good practical idea. Even something we should do at Animals also. We have a lot of cool stuff and we don't have a good library of things to pick from. And I think that's, I also know that from my own role when I was at a larger, still startup, but pretty big. It's like, people looking for stuff that don't know what there is already. So they ask for new things, but actually you might already have it. So I thought that's a really good tip.
Yeah, especially if you are like a sales-led SaaS company. Because the sales team is always going to be asking for new things, and keeping inventory and getting more mileage out of the things you already have is certainly a way to drive some efficiency and, get the monkey off your back.
The other thing, and we kind of talked about in the interview, but I had not had that realization. But as she was talking, I was thinking about that content is not always seen maybe as a specialistic craft or skill as like engineering is, for example, and that's also why people sometimes think they know what they want. And she was not literally saying that, but like kind of what she's describing is like, you need to show your expertise, and you need to show what's possible, and you need to also show that you are actually the one who can come up with the best strategy and the best solution.
Yes. I imagine there are other teams, like I bet the product team gets a lot of ideas that are kind of like half-baked, and from people that think they know. So I don't think this problem is totally unique to content, although I do think marketing generally is like public facing and you get a lot of feedback. I experience the same thing often at UiPath. Like someone fills out the form or pings you on Slack and they're like, hey, I need this thing, And there's kind of two ways to take it, right? One, it's like, I'm just going to turn my brain off and like go do this thing. Other times it does mean you have to kind of spend some time with that person with the idea and like help them figure out, okay, what are you really trying to achieve? What is the goal? What's the measurable outcome? Something like this. And then help them rethink how they can actually achieve that in a slightly different way. Or maybe it is with existing content. Yeah, my big takeaway, I guess one, content should be more strategic than service-oriented within an organization. And then two, some ideas for how to help shift the role of content within an enterprise from service-oriented, again, like order taking, to strategic. It was, again, bring data, right? So like data helps solve arguments. To doing a roadshow, like basically talking to stakeholders about what their needs are and making sure that you have some alignment and they hear you out on your ideas, you hear them out. Alongside of that, I think is like basically educating folks around the role of content at this organization, how you want to take things, what's working, bringing in outsiders to help do that. Also like using, hey, everybody at this company seems to love Salesforce's content. Let's use them as an example. Another one is using pilots, right? Like, hey, let's MVP this, as opposed to like, it's an easy way to sell things in. And then the last one is like that one-to-one kind of Judah that we were just talking about. Nice. Well, look forward to seeing you all on the next episode of the Animals Podcast. We'll continue exploring enterprise content programs with yet another excellent guest.